Hi, well, this is a short screencast on exam technique for CIMA E1 for the November 2014 exam. And what I'm going to cover in this screencast is just really some basic ideas in relation to how you should approach the exam and also the sorts of things that you should watch out for in terms of mistakes that students do make in respect of E1. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken the August E1 exam. I'm just going to run you through what you'll see when you open the paper. The first thing to bear in mind, obviously, is this issue of our reading time. Okay, now I think that's key for us in terms of getting on the right foot with the E1 paper. And my suggestion with the 20 minutes reading time is to actually go straight to section C. Yeah, and the reason that I say that is that section C, in my experience, is the area where students tend to perform badly, and that is in the main because they haven't practiced enough written questions. So if we were to go to section C, what I would be inclined to do is to read the requirements first for the first question. In this case, it's question 3, to scan them and to see what the body of the information is and the body of the requirements are. Okay. Once you've read the requirements, I would scan through, or indeed read, the actual scenario itself. So you should, within 3 or 4 minutes, have a fix on question 3, and then I would do the same literally for question 4. Now, as you read down the question, what I would suggest that you do is annotate it. Yeah, so pick up information based on what you read in the requirements. I mean, a surefire way to waste time in the E1 exam is to read the paper or read the section C questions more times than you need to. So on your first read of the requirements, get a good fix on exactly what they're looking for, and then as you read the main scenario, highlight or underline any key areas. Now, once you've read question 3 and question 4, I would then outline some sort of broad plan in relation to each of the sections. And I'm suggesting that what you should do is do section C first, okay, for the reasons that I've just outlined, but also because I think that section C is probably more difficult anyway, even for the well-prepared candidate. So really what you'd be looking to do with each of the A, B, and C within section C is to have probably 3 or 4 or possibly even 5 key points in terms of an outline, or any points at all in terms of an outline answer by the end of the 20 minutes. And that may necessitate you reading the section C questions more than once, and I have no issue with that at all. So really on this this reading time, what I would suggest you do is come up with a very, very quick or very broad plan in relation to each of the sections of section C. Okay, you'll note that within section C, A and B are invariably 10 marks, and the C part will be 5. So really the time, I guess, should be spent on the A and B parts, certainly. The C part of section C questions often tend to be just a little bit easier. I think the A and B tend to be the more difficult parts. And obviously what you're aiming for in each of the questions is a minimum of 12.5 or thereabouts, rather than obviously 25. You simply need to pass the section C. I do think that if you can pass the section C, i.e. get 25 out of 50, then your chances of passing the exam are better than 50%, because I think that some students will fall down in section C, and I certainly think that section A particularly is an easier section to score more than 50% in. So in essence, if you can pass C, you have a very, very good chance of passing the exam. So that would be my approach in the first 20 minutes. of the exam is straight to section C, ignore the other sections and avoid the temptation to scan the multiple choice questions or indeed scan the section B. You'll have plenty of time to do that because you'll make up time elsewhere, particularly on section A. Okay, so if we go back to section A, a couple of points on this that I've noticed been able to establish by speaking to students. I think there's a certain amount of technique, believe it or not, that can be employed in relation to section A style questions. And I think the first one is that you should do the questions that you can do easily and that you're reasonably sure of first. Okay, now that may well be 5 or 6 questions possibly. Certainly it's easier to score marks on section A, and you certainly should be aiming for around about 15 or thereabouts, or indeed 16 out of 20. So I'd certainly be trying to get at least 7 or 8 right or thereabouts. So I would do your best questions first, leave the ones that you're not sure on, and then I would suggest that perhaps you go back and reread the ones that are causing you a little bit of difficulty, and they'll probably be in 2 groups. There'll be the ones that you have an idea on in some way, shape or form, and there'll be the ones that you're really not sure on at all. Okay. Now, it may well be that you find that if you do the questions in section A that you know first, perhaps that's 5, maybe it's 6. If you leave the balance of the questions until you've completed section B, you may well see, or you may well find that something triggers. Okay. I think the worst thing that you could do is give an answer and then go back and change it afterwards, because that's just wasting time. So you don't need to make a decision on the more difficult section A questions until towards the end of the exam. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that do what you can up to a point, leave what you can't, and then move on. Okay. Now, in terms of section B, quite a few points that I would make here, certainly from my experience of marking mock exams and indeed recent mock exams. I think there's several mistakes that students make. Now, we know that within section B, we've got basically 6 parts and 5 marks each. And I think the issue for students, given the fact that these are written questions, is that obviously the examiner can choose from any area at all of the syllabus. Now, that means that there are bound to be areas within question 2 that you're going to struggle with. And as a sort of a general rule of thumb, I think that probably 3 to 4 areas are invariably manageable, and possibly 2 to 3 are quite tricky. It's not like multiple choice where you have the answer there, so maybe you've got a better chance. So in terms of dealing with this, several points that I would make. Again, I would go for your best questions first. Okay, that may be 3, it may be 2, it could be 4, but I'd certainly do your best questions first. I would also make sure that you lay out the answers in the form of your question paper. You won't find that section B questions take more than a page, so therefore you can simply label out your pages A to F and do each question in order. It makes it easier for your marker, and it gives you a little bit of structure as well as to chopping and changing. Excuse me. So over and above that, doing your best questions first, there's one key point that I've noticed repeatedly within section B questions that students are making mistakes on. And it's this idea that if you have a requirement that asks you broadly to explain, let's say, difficulties associated with the management of geographically dispersed teams, it's 5 marks. More often than not, certainly 7 or 8 times out of 10, the marks will be available for 5 points. And the thing that I've noticed students doing is that they're only providing 2 points or perhaps 3 points, and they think that they're done. Now, it may well be that knowledge is an issue. I can understand that. But what I'm saying is that wherever possible in your answers to section B questions, make sure, regardless, that you make 5 main points. Obviously, you're prompted in B here, you're prompted in D and C, that's fine. What I'm talking about is the ones that you're not prompted in. Where you provide a marker with only 2 or 3 points, and there are 5 elements to the answer. Your maximum marks, even if you get them all right, is obviously 2 or 3. So just be careful with these questions that don't ask you for a number of points. I think more often than not 100% of the time, but more often than not, those answers have, 5, if not 4 points. And from marking mock exams for E1 for quite a few years now, students don't write enough for the Section B questions in order to be able to pass them, and that's to get more than, let's say, 2.5 or thereabouts. So just be careful with that. In terms of the balance of the questions, if you follow through on the advice that I've given, you're going to have completed Section C in its entirety. You will have come back to Section A and done the questions that you can within reason, and probably left a few that you can't. So once you get to the end of Section B, you'll have the balance of your Section A questions to do, and possibly 2 or 3 or maybe more in Section B, and I would leave them to last. You'll find that time-wise within the E1 exam, I don't think it's overly time pressured as long as you don't run over considerably on your Section C questions. So you should have ample time to develop reasonably good answers for Section B and of course Section C. Okay. Over and above those key points in relation to the setup, the paper, and the order that I would suggest that you approach them, I think other key points are really, your professionalism in your answers, and also your presentation. Yeah, as I've mentioned, one of the key areas in this paper, the key to passing this exam, is doing good Section C questions and of course other sections, but particularly Section C. So just be careful, how you lay your answers out on paper. Use short paragraphs for Section C questions wherever possible. Use lists, because that will be easier for you to deal with and certainly still gain you marks. And just be careful as to your overall time planning across each of the sections, in particular Section B and Section C. Okay, I hope that's been helpful, and good luck in the exam.